economics, is that you look at things from an interdisciplinary point of view, and it seems to me that to really understand the issues, one has to take an interdisciplinary approach, and one has to learn from other disciplines different ways of perceiving the problem, and move away from this eternally narrowing idea of that if you quantify everything, somehow it's going to bring solutions. So could you comment on that? Thank you. I feel a rage about that. Statistic.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. I mean, in a way you could say that's actually just my restlessness as an intellect, because I've never conveniently found the home that boxes me in the right way. So I have fledgling-like moved from nest to nest. And until I found really a place where I could build exactly what you're describing, the ability to put different disciplines together to get people who understood that need for different disciplinary actions. I'm absolutely with you, and I'm incredibly proud of the people who have engaged in that exercise with me.
I have a question which might be more difficult to answer, and I hope it isn't too awkward. I mean, it seems to me at the moment that part of the great growth industry is bringing Western prosperity to what used to be called the third world, particularly China and Africa. And I really wonder whether there's any possibility of deflecting them from a path of really quite aggressively following the model of Western affluence and growth, and whether you have any thoughts on that idea.
So if I was really being totally honest, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I absolutely accept the challenge. The message of prosperity without growth is not that we shouldn't increase incomes in the poorest nations in the world. I mean, those are the places, and all the evidence speaks to this, where even a small increase in income makes a fantastic difference in terms of basic human flourishing. And so there is a strong sense in which prosperity without growth is about making room for growth in those places where it's most needed. Now, the point that you're making is slightly more complex than that in that process they're also locking down a system which is following a growth-based model, and it's following actually a largely materialistic, individualistic model as well.
So it's creating a level of inequality.
It is creating huge inequalities, and it's also clearly beyond the capacity of the planet to sustain. I still believe that the principal message here is for the advanced economies, because those are the places where you can most clearly say perhaps it's time to rethink this model and to not push the limits simply because we've had the advantages of that system in the past. At the same time, my hope is, and I don't think this is fully followed through really, is that there is perhaps it is almost a whole other book really, in saying which bits of that vision can realistically be used to structure the way that development is occurring in those poorer nations. And I mean, there is, I think, a sense in which that is meaningful, because the vision is based around some of the ideas of human development that have a lot of currency in terms of those poorer nations. And it is, I think, almost like a battle, really, to create enough institutional strength, enough political will to think about that different model of development in those places as well. I haven't even really approached that task. It is one still to be done.
Tim, do you think, Councillor Alexis Rao from Camden Council, do you think it's a coincidence that the Transition Town movement was flowering as your report was in gestation? Or do you think there's a general movement out there coming together to do the same things as you're suggesting?
I think it's been one of the most, encouraging things, really. And I think it's almost impossible to say in these circumstances any kind of, or intimate even any chain of cause and effect. I think there just are times when ideas begin to emerge in different ways, and I think you're absolutely right to say that the Transition Town movement and various other places are really incredibly interesting grassroots, community-based initiatives, people saying it's time for a change, it's time to do something differently, and I'm enormously hopeful about exactly those kinds of initiatives. But I think the difficulty that they face and that really needs to be addressed, and I believe has to be addressed in the policy framework, is the conditions that allow those people, those initiatives to flourish, because they won't get as far as they would like to get without some changes at a bigger level.
We've time, I think, for a couple of questions. Jonathan, very shortly.
Yes, Natalie Bennett, editor of The Guardian Weekly. I'd like to follow on from Alexis's question and also relate to what Jonathan said in terms of the politics of this. Jonathan said there's no way that there's going to be any serious consideration of this in the next coming British election. There's transition towns and all that are still relatively small movements, and the sort of meetings you were talking about in Bath are still quite small in terms of electoral politics. Where, when, how can this get real traction in British electoral politics?
Again, it's very difficult to say. I mean, in a way, this is the point at which I think you have to sort of accept what your responsibilities are and what they aren't, and what your limits are in relation to this. And I think, in a way, the best chance of those things having traction in politics is to be working at every single level to create the change that's needed in people's ideas, in what people are doing, in how they're interacting with policy, in the conversations they're having with business, in the choices that they make for where they put their money, in investment, and yes, perhaps sometimes in lobbying, you know, very, very hard in relation to the issues in the places where they might get a bit of traction. And that, I mean, I've seen that really as my role as a commissioner, and Prosperity Without Growth came out of that role as commissioner to do exactly that, to create the space where those changes, those kinds of changes might be possible. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be effective. It doesn't necessarily mean just because we have all these transition towns they're going to be effective. We do not know where change is going to come from. All that we know at this point in time is that that change is absolutely necessary. So to me it's about creating that momentum on all kinds of different fronts and maintaining actually a sense of belief that another future is possible.
One last question.
Sorry. This isn't really a question, actually. I just would like to. I would like to thank. I'd like to thank you for having the brain the size of a planet. I'd like to thank you for having the determination of a warrior, and I'd like to thank you for being a fine human being, Tim, and actually really putting your academic and your intellectual and your emotional talents to the service of the planet. So I just want to say thank you for having your start.
Carry on and on, just in terms of promises that will hold out as opening up the debate and research. Please enjoy and bye.